Hi, happy Thanksgiving. I'm grateful that you're here. I know that for most of us, or at least for me, I didn't grow up eating organ meats, and when I first started bringing them into our home, I was pretty overwhelmed. But Thanksgiving is a great opportunity to serve all the giblets and to start making friends with them. Thanksgiving turkeys usually come with the giblets, and there are even a couple of very traditional ways to include the giblets, like adding them right into stuffing or gravy. Today I'll show you some of the things I've picked up over the years that really help guarantee I'll have a juicy turkey, which my family loves, and I'll also show you how I make stuffing and gravy, using the giblets, of course. This video has a PDF that goes with it that has my own salt references for the dry brine, the roasting times that I typically use as a guideline, and also the recipes for roast turkey, stuffing, and gravy. For the turkey, I start several days in advance, like on Saturday or Sunday before Thanksgiving. If I have a 12-pound bird, a small bird, I'd start on Sunday. If I had a large 22-pound bird, I'd probably start on Saturday. I would still defrost for 2 days, but would allow an extra day for the dry brine to work its magic with a bigger bird. In this case, I was using a 16-pound bird, and here's how the week looked for me. On Sunday, I placed the bird in the sink for 24 hours. On Monday, I put the bird into my fridge for another 24 hours. On Tuesday, I prepared a dry brine and seasoned the bird with salt and herb. On Thursday, I take the bird out early in the day so it will have several hours to sit on my kitchen counter, tempering the meat and coming to room temperature before roasting for the allotted time. To prepare the dry brine, I measure the salt and mix with chopped herbs. I rub this into the cavity of the bird and also over the outside. When I prepare the dry brine, I'll pull the neck and giblets from the bird and I'll reserve them in a seal-tight container in my fridge until I'm ready to roast the turkey. If they come in a bag in that cavity, I often leave them in there to keep them sealed a little better and to minimize oxidation. I like to cook my stuffing separately, so before I cook the bird, I typically will stuff the cavity with some extra herbs as well as some citrus, lemons or oranges or both, to impart moisture and some aromatics as the bird cooks. I also add some butter under the skin to add moisture as well. I tie the legs of the bird to the tailbone to keep a more compact shape for even cooking. I generally split my estimated cooking times into thirds. For the first third, I roast the bird at a slightly higher temperature, breast down, back up. After 1/3 cooking time, I reduce the heat, I flip the bird breast up, I put it back in the oven. After 2/3 of the cooking time, I'll check the temperature again and I'll baste the bird with any fat from the bottom of the pan. I'll also gauge how much more cooking time will be needed and when to start checking the temperature again. I want to take the bird out when the deepest part of the breast is 160 degrees Fahrenheit, and then allow the bird to rest on the counter for at least 20 minutes before carving. The temperature will continue to rise after the bird comes out of the oven, just a bit. In the meantime, I start preparing the stuffing. Because the giblets usually sit in the fridge for a couple of days, they might have a little bit of oxidation, usually seen as dark patches or spots on the liver. I don't worry about this much, but if it looks bad to you, you can trim off any portions that seem amiss. In this case, I'm splitting these organs in half to reserve some for each recipe, so I can show you both. But in practice, I usually just choose one recipe for using the giblets, the stuffing or the gravy, and I go with that. I think it's easier to prep them all together and move on. Okay, so for the stuffing, I will not pre-cook the giblets. I just want to trim off any membranes or silver skin and then chop the organs into small pieces. I think that the squeamishness of my crowd would determine how small I chop them. If you're trying to hide them, of course, do a little bit more work up front to minimize trouble later and mince them well. In any case, if the liver has any white membrane exposed, trim that. If there are any tubules sticking out from the top of the heart, trim those down too. And take the silver skin off the gizzards. This is a bit more work. I usually start from the outside and work down the sides, rotating the triangular meat pieces to trim the exterior. After this, chop them small and reserve while you prep the rest of your ingredients. For stuffing, I used a greased pan and mixed everything together, and that's pretty much it. I bake it for about 40 minutes at about 300 Fahrenheit. For the gravy, I make it right in the roasting pan itself, so I can mix in all the brown bits and gelatin right off the bottom of the pan and into my gravy. The general rule of thumb for gravy is that you want to match the proportion of fat to flour for making the roux, and then add broth to the desired consistency. I used sprouted flour here. You can also use arrowroot. Of course, you can make gravy without flour. To do that, you would just want to use a broth that gels, and then this consistency will hold. Without the flour, it can be a bit harder to make the emulsion, where the fat is mixed in evenly, but you don't have to worry about that here because in the end, we're gonna blend this gravy so it'll emulsify in the blender. To prepare the giblets, in this case, I slice the heart and the gizzard, and then along with my liver, I gently pan fry them. After, I cut them into pieces that will blend evenly and reserve until my gravy is ready. So for the gravy, if I have 1 tablespoon of fat, I'll use 1 tablespoon of flour and 1 cup of broth. Here I have about 4 tablespoons of fat, and so I'll use 1/4 cup of flour and then add 4 cups of broth. First, I wait for the fat to get hot in the pan, then I whisk in the flour. This flour is already a bit brown, so it's harder to tell, but usually you would keep mixing until the flour starts to brown just a little bit in the fat before adding the first bit of broth. When you see that browning, you add the broth bit by bit, making sure that each addition is incorporated well before adding more. Each time I try to scrape up more of the brown bits from the bottom of the pan until I've incorporated all of them. When you've added all of your broth, bring to a boil. If the consistency is not right, feel free to add a little bit more broth or to boil down for a few more moments if needed. After it's boiled, pull this from the heat, pour into your blender along with the reserved organs and give it a whirl. Make sure it's blended well and voila, you've got your gravy. We have so much to appreciate. Our very own heart and lungs, things we don't often think about, show up for us day in and day out. This physical body that we have really is nothing short of a miracle. Appreciate yourself for taking care, for taking the time to prepare and nourish yourself and your family every day, and especially on these holidays when we can all come together. If you have a turkey with giblets to share with your family, what a gift. Eating nose to tail is really an opportunity to honor the animal that gives its own life to nourish ours. Hopefully, of course, your reserved neck and your carcass will go into a stock pot in short order to provide you with a flavorful broth so the flavors of the day can last well into the following week. Thank you for being here. Wishing you and yours a wonderful Thanksgiving and a bright holiday season.